So our focus here is going to be to look at this region, Northeast Wisconsin. Because often, this is an area, this is a region that's lumped together with, French North America, so to speak, because the French were the Europeans to get here first. But it doesn't really tell the full story. We live here, so it makes sense to look at what was going on, not only before, but simultaneous to what was happening in the eastern portion of North America. Now, this phrase contact, before this time, you might have heard discovery. The Europeans discovered North America. Not so, because there were millions who were living in this land prior to European arrival. The phrase contact makes more sense, solely because we look at what happened when two different cultures who had no prior knowledge of each other collided. In this area, we have two predominant tribes. First is the Menominee. Now, the Menominee are Algonquin. Algonquin is simply a way of stating that that was their linguistic group, their cultural group. There's Algonquin, there's Iroquois, there's Siouan, etc. But the Menominee are Algonquin, translating roughly to wild rice. They had a range within northeast Wisconsin. And at about the start of the 1800s, that range was 10 million acres. That's at the start of the 1800s. 10 million acres of land, and their main village, because they would move depending on the season, depending on when the wild rice needed to be harvested, their main village was near Marinette. We think there were about 2,000 to 4,000 when the Europeans showed up. The dominant group in the region were the Ho-Chunk. They are a Siouan band, and it means people of the big voice. They were dominant in what we now call Green Bay. Predominantly, they fish, they hunt, they gather. Whenever you try and do population counts, it's difficult, but we think about 8 to 20,000 or so were present when the French arrived. You might hear the word Winnebago sometimes, like Lake Winnebago. Winnebago was what the Algonquin called the Ho-Chunk. So really, they're one and the same. Now, this gives somewhat of an idea of the land that was controlled by all of these peoples. So here, Menominee cessions, meaning land that will eventually have to be given up. All of this was Menominee land. Menominee cession to eastern tribes, chiefly the Oneida, so site of the modern Oneida Reservation. Large portions of land. So West Appear High School is on what was Menominee land. So that's what's happening when the French arrive. So Nicolet restaurant, Nicolet was a paper mill, Nicolet National Bank, all coming from Jean Nicolet. Now, he's about 20 years old when he goes to New France at the request of Samuel de Champlain. And eventually, New France is going to include lands in Canada, down through the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Valley. That'll be considered part of New France. Now, he was very good with languages. He learned the Algonquin language and culture, and he was involved with the Five Nations in diplomatic negotiations. The Five Nations of upstate New York, now the Six Nations. But he became the official interpreter of New France. He traveled with several Huron braves and sailed from current Lake Huron to Lake Michigan, and he made landfall at modern-day Green Bay. Apparently, he was greeted by about 5,000 Ho-Chunk warriors who were aware that he was coming. He arranged a peace treaty between the Huron and the Ho-Chunk, and also a treaty with the French. Now, interestingly enough, due to the vast trade networks we know existed during this time frame, the Ho-Chunk would have been aware of the existence of white Europeans. So Nicolet's arrival wouldn't have been that big of a shock. If you go on the far northeastern part of Green Bay, you're leaving Brown County, going up to Door County, you can see the statue of Jean Nicolet at a county park. It's the same county park where you can see the Weequahic Falls waterfall. So we can still see remnants of that arrival. Now, if you go to the Brown County Courthouse, this is what you'll see. A mural that was painted in the early 1900s. This is the common interpretation of his arrival. Nicolet was looking for a northwest passage, a waterway that went through North America to China. He wore colorful robes because he thought he had reached China. He shot his guns in the air that the natives called thundersticks. The second image is a little more accurate. I mean, you see some children hiding, but there's more emphasis. Here it's all Nicolet. Here there's emphasis on the Huron braves, and the Ho-Chunk are more curious, expectant, rather than scared and uncertain. And as a side note, it did not take Nicolet very long to figure out that he did not find the Northwest Passage. So we have the Menominee and Ho-Chunk, who are dominant in the region. The French arrive first. The French continue to arrive, but missionaries are the ones who come next. We have missionaries and fur traders. Father Jacques Marquette. If you've ever been to Statuary Hall, Marquette is there. All right, he makes his voyage with Joliet because the Six Nations, it's the Six Nations at this time, they are at war with the Huron. All right, they're at war with the Huron, and that eliminates a reliable supply of furs. So the French traders have to look more towards the Great Lakes themselves and the tribes that exist there for assistance. Now, his goal is to map the region, to set up trading posts. That's something you'll see with French settlement that is very different than English settlement. The English were all about land ownership, more people going to get more land and cultivate it. The French had minimal settlers, but they had French fur trading posts, very similar to the trading post you'll see if you go to Heritage Hill. Now, Father Marquette is proficient at learning languages, such as Huron. So he traveled the Fox River, the river that cuts through De Pere. Father Marquette traveled through the Fox River until it connected with the Wisconsin. Today, it's the modern city of Portage, Wisconsin. That's where the Fox meets the Wisconsin River. And then the Wisconsin River flowed until the Mississippi, which is the modern site of Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. That's where the two rivers meet. He takes the Mississippi River down to where it meets the Arkansas, and he turns back because he saw natives with European trinkets and didn't want to risk conflict with the Spanish, who he knew were present in the region. So Father Marquette is a Jesuit, a missionary, who's there for scouting out possible trade posts, but also for converting natives. And then we have Father Claude Alloway, the namesake of Alloway, Wisconsin, Claude Alloway Bridge. That's him. Among other things, he served as missionary to the Potawatomi. He proclaimed the Great Lakes and Mississippi River Valley to be under the control of the King of France. And he actually founded his mission at a site known as Rapid des Pires, last set of rapids on the Fox River. Today we just say De Pere. Rapid des Pires. You can see it on the side of the fire trucks. It's just called De Pere, last set of rapids on the Fox before entering the Green Bay. His written records provide an excellent account of the Catholic Church's influence in the Midwest in the 1600s. And if you go to Heritage Hill, you go under the bridge, you see the fur trading post. If you keep going, you'll see a replica of the wigwam that was set up as the first Catholic church in the area, set up by Father Claude Alloway. So the missionaries will follow Nicolet, and obviously there will be consequences of this contact. First one is the fur trade. The French will gain, of the European nations, the French gain a monopoly on it. At these fur trading posts, like at Heritage Hill, they will provide their gifts in the fall. So the French provide goods. You can see them here, metal, guns, alcohol, cloth. They provide them in the fall, so the natives essentially are indebted to them to get an equal amount of beaver pelts over the winter so that when they arrive in the spring, there's an even balance. Now, beaver is highly sought after in Europe because it's waterproof and well insulated. So it was expensive well into the 20th century. Now, the French did figure out early on that there wasn't much of a native tolerance for alcohol, so they did use it to try and broker better deals. On their end, since we've seen the French plan is focused on economics, a minimum number of settlers. They need the cooperation of powerful tribes for protection. The natives figure this out, so they use that for their advantage. Now the route here, a lot of it we can see, even Wisconsin Portage is labeled. It traverses the route of Father Marquette. So we have the economic consequences. There is a decrease in the native population. Remember that there were 8,000 to 20,000 Ho-Chunk in the area when Nicolet arrived in 1634. That population fell to about 500. 500 by the late 1600s. So in about 6 decades, 8,000 to 20,000 to 500. Now, from the disease standpoint, the Ho-Chunk accounts talk about people turning yellow as a symptom, which isn't necessarily consistent with smallpox. So there's still some ambiguity about what it was. When it comes to conflict, various tribes and nations were continually at war with one another. Now, as a result of what were called the Beaver Wars, they were conflicts that occurred to gain control of the fur trade. The 5 nations were armed by the British and the Dutch. The Algonquin-speaking tribes were backed by the French. Many of these Algonquin-speaking peoples were pushed out of their traditional lands, more in eastern areas. They ended up in Wisconsin, or the land we now know as Wisconsin, and this places a huge strain on the Menominee and the Ho-Chunk. Wisconsin was kind of like a refugee camp. This is something that the French did not fully understand when they arrived. It took a long time for them to figure that out. So the native population decreased because of disease and conflict. Other consequences. The Jesuits wanted to spread the Christian faith, and it was said that Father Claude Alloway baptized 10,000 natives into Christianity. Finally, the 2 main European powers will collide. The French have their position in Canada along the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. The British are establishing a presence on the East Coast. Each side is pressing towards each other for economic reasons, so conflict will be inevitable. And unfortunately, these Native American tribes and nations who have been present for so long are going to be stuck in the middle of it.